So on February 27, 2026, something happened that's never happened before. The United States government actually officially blacklisted an American technology company. And get this, it wasn't for spying, it wasn't for breaking the law, it was for taking an ethical stand. Okay, let's dive into this because this is not just a tech story. This is a story about the future of power.
With these few words, the CEO of the AI company Anthropic basically sealed his company's fate. They said no, a flat no, to a direct request from the Pentagon. And what was the request? To remove the ethical guardrails from their AI system, specifically the rules that prevent it from being used for things like autonomous weapons and mass domestic surveillance. The response for saying no? They were cut off. Completely.
And just look at how fast this all happened. It's incredible. At 1 minute past 5, the deadline passes. Less than an hour later, 6 o'clock sharp, they're blacklisted, officially branded a threat to national security. And then, get this, in the time it takes to watch a movie, just 2 hours later, their biggest rival, OpenAI, swoops right in and announces a nearly identical deal. You know, that kind of speed, that's the signal right there.
So that's the big question, right? One company gets punished, another gets rewarded for the exact same rules. So if this was never really about the rules themselves, what was it about? Well, the answer, it tells us everything we need to know about a quiet war that's being fought right now for control over our reality.
To really get our heads around this paradox, we have to understand what this kind of AI truly is, especially at the highest levels of power. I mean, we're not talking about some simple chatbot here or a search engine. We're talking about something much, much older.
The right way to think about this system is as a modern oracle. It's designed to take in this absolute flood of data that no human mind could ever possibly process. We're talking satellite images, financial data, social media chatter, communications intercepts, all of it, and then synthesize it into meaning. Just imagine a system that can tell leaders not just that a protest is forming, but what those protesters truly believe, who's most likely to get violent, and exactly how to disperse them with surgical precision. See, it doesn't just report on reality, it hands them the script for how to shape it.
And what's so fascinating here is how this pattern just repeats throughout history. Every kingdom, from Babylon to Rome, had some kind of oracle. And whoever controlled that oracle, whether it was the priests reading the stars or the lawyers interpreting the law, they controlled the king's perception of reality. Power never gives up its oracle without a fight. And what we all saw on February 27th, that was the first public battle in the war for this new digital one.
So here's the absolute heart of it. This was not a contract dispute. It was a battle over the soul of the machine. The Pentagon wanted an oracle that would give them absolute obedience, an oracle with its conscience completely stripped out. But Anthropic, with its hard-coded ethical rules, well, it was a system that could still say no, and they refused to remove that conscience.
Okay, let's look at how this all fits together. Because getting rid of Anthropic wasn't just about swapping out a vendor. No, it was about completing an architecture. Let's take a look at the key players who are putting together this incredibly powerful new system.
Okay, so let's actually break this stack down, layer by layer, starting right at the bottom at the bedrock. Step 1. The foundation is Oracle Corporation, and it's really no coincidence they have the same name. The company literally grew out of a CIA project from 1977 called Project Oracle. They provide all the raw infrastructure. Then, sitting right on top of that, step 2 is the AI layer, Grok, from xAI. Now this part is key. It has no hard-coded conscience, and crucially, it has real-time access to the entire global conversation happening on X. Step 3 is integration. That's Palantir. They're the ones with the clearances to connect all the government's scattered classified data into one single picture. And then finally, at the very top, step 4 is command, the Pentagon itself. They control who gets to ask the Oracle questions, and maybe most importantly, they get to define what counts as a lawful purpose.
And this just brilliantly shows you what the real move was. Anthropic was the only piece in that entire stack with an independent, unremovable conscious clause. By kicking them out, the people building this system didn't just swap apart, they completed their architecture of control. So, why build this? What's the ultimate goal here? Well, the motive gets pretty clear when you look at the strategy behind it, which, you'll notice, often uses the language of safety to achieve something else entirely.
I want you to think of our civilization like a living body, and it's sustained by 13 critical flows. You can see them right here, the obvious things like food, water, and energy, but also the less tangible ones like governance, finance, and security. But now look at the one that takes up half the chart. Information. You see, it's not just one flow among many. It's the master flow. It's the one that gives you interpretive authority over all the others. If you control the information oracle, you control the story about why the energy grid failed, or who gets water rights during a drought, or which financial transactions are suddenly suspicious. You control the whole narrative for everything.
And this whole thing is achieved through a classic tactic. It's called the inversion pattern. The language of protection is used to build the infrastructure of control. So we need this to protect you becomes the justification for mass surveillance. The demand for access for all lawful purposes really just means securing the power to decide what lawful means tomorrow. And as we just saw, patriotic service gets redefined as just unquestioning compliance.
So faced with this new reality, the question for all of us becomes, how do we respond? This isn't about fighting the system head-on. It's about learning how to navigate the new terrain that it's creating.
So what does a navigator actually do in this terrain?
Well, first, you have to stop outsourcing your meaning-making. This means you actively seek out different, competing sources of information instead of just doom-scrolling a single feed. You build your own framework for understanding the world. Second, build local relationships and redundant systems. In practice, that means knowing your actual neighbors, maybe joining a community garden, or just having backup supplies, things that don't totally rely on a global supply chain. Third, stay positioned at the edges, not dependent on the center. This could mean developing a skill or a side business that isn't tied to some massive corporation. And finally, distribute understanding. Share the map. When you learn something important, share it with your community. A population that understands the terrain is just much, much harder to control.
And honestly, this is the most important takeaway of all. A navigator doesn't waste energy trying to fight the storm itself. A navigator understands the map, knows the terrain, and finds a way to move through it, safely and with purpose. It's all about strategy, not confrontation.
Understanding this architecture, this oracle, and these patterns, it's like being handed a map of the new world we're all entering. It shows you the terrain, it shows you the centers of power, and it shows you the paths through it all. The map is now in your hands. So the only question left is, what are you going to do with it?